Hi there, Alex here at mixinglessons.com. In this video, we're going to talk about editing your tracks. Now, when it comes to editing your tracks, it can be a very, very lengthy process. But there's something you can do, a very simple approach that you can adopt, which will save you tons and tons of time. So it's very straightforward, and I'm going to show you that in this video. Before we dive into the lesson, be sure to pick up my free EQ cheat sheet, my free compression cheat sheet, and my free vocal recording guide by heading over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads. Okay, so something that I used to do when I was first learning to mix music was, once I'd recorded everything, I would look at my tracks and I would kind of look at them in relation to the grid and look at them in relation to the click track that I'd recorded to, or that I'd recorded a band to. And I'd usually start with the drums. And if we just focus on the kick drum for now, I would go through and I'd think, this looks okay, this looks okay, that's maybe slightly late, but it looks okay. Maybe slightly early, but not bad. And then I would come to something like this and I would think, oh, that actually looks quite out of time. So does this. It looks as if it's behind the beat, it's behind the click track. And so what I would do is I would go through and I would edit all of my tracks to make sure that they were really locked onto the grid and really tight with the click track. And I would do similar things with the bass and the guitar and all the other instruments. I would make sure that, first and foremost, the drums were locked to the grid, and then make sure that all of the other instruments were kind of locked in with the drums. So depending on what the bass player was playing, for example, I would make sure that the note that was supposed to be played on beat 1 was exactly locked in with the kick drum on beat 1, and that both were locked in with the click track. Now, obviously, there are certain facilities in different DAWs and in different software which will try and do this automatically for you. So it'll chop your drums up or chop your tracks up and try and align them with the grid. I've never had a great deal of success with those, and I've always found that I can get it to sound less obvious, more natural or more transparent by doing it manually. And if you are going to do it manually, it can be a very, very lengthy, time-consuming process. And if I'm totally honest with you, this is something that I rarely ever do now. Now, my process is never really to look at what the tracks look like in relation to the grid, and not to pay any attention about whether they look like they're in time. Now, the only time that I will do any kind of editing to the timing of a performance is if I can hear the need to. You know, if there's one thing that I could change about modern DAWs, it would be how much visual information they give us sometimes. Now, obviously, most of the time, the things that our DAWs show us are really, really useful. But sometimes when you look at things and you look at them in relation to the grid, we can start making decisions based on what we can see rather than what we're listening to. I think this is true of things like EQ. You know, sometimes I find myself second-guessing my EQ choices because I feel like the EQ doesn't look right, rather than just being entirely focused on what it sounds like. And even now, it's one of those things that I sometimes have to remind myself of. Or maybe the same with compression. It might look as if there's too much compression, but my ears are telling me that it's the right amount. So I really try to avoid basing any of the decisions that I make about making any kinds of edits to the timing of a take based on what it looks like. Because when you actually listen to this take, it sounds absolutely fine. It doesn't sound out of time in the slightest. Now, when you do go through and you really heavily edit things and you get them really locked onto the grid, it does have a certain character to it. And that's a character that I think in some genres is important. The conventions in some genres are to have this really, really focused, tight song which is completely locked to the grid. But there are also other genres where that isn't necessary and that kind of isn't the convention. And in those kinds of genres, it's often more important for your songs to sound a little bit more natural and a little bit more human. So for some people, doing a lot of editing and making sure that everything's really locked to the grid is necessary and it's part of the sound of that genre. For other people, to them it would make the music sound quite robotic and it wouldn't sound very human or very natural. For me, I tend to lean more towards preferring a little bit more of a human and a little bit more of a natural sound now. And that's really one of the reasons why I will only edit things if they sound like they need to be edited. So the drums being a little bit before or after the click. Yes, it's not as tight as that kind of really focused, locked-on sound, but it's still in time and it's still tight in the way that a human would play the track. And for me, that's kind of the right balance. So hope that gives you something to think about. Don't forget to head over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads for that free EQ cheat sheet, free compression cheat sheet, and free vocal recording guide. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.